so our next talk then is to talk about exercise. So the first thing to mention really is to try and make sure we're all talking about the same thing when we say exercise. And just to clarify what we mean when we talk about exercise, and to make sure you get the idea about the difference between activity and exercise. Okay, so when we talk to you about exercise, what we mean is working your heart and your lungs harder than your usual level of activity. Now, your usual level of activity is obviously going to vary. Some people may be very active, some people may be less active. So it's all about what is usual for you. So things like going out for a brisk walk, or cycling, or gym, or aerobics might be something that you need to think about as being your exercise. Meanwhile, all the other stuff that you just have to do every day, which we call activities, so that might be getting up, getting washed, getting dressed, cleaning the house, cleaning the car, going shopping, looking after the grandkids, whatever your usual day is, that's your usual level of activity. And so the idea of the exercise is that we're trying to work harder than that usual level of activity, because your heart will have got used to you being as active as you are. So if we want to try and get you fitter, we have to work over and above that normal level of activity. So therefore, you might well be a very active person who's always on the go and very busy, but you still need to exercise. All of us still need to exercise to try and improve our fitness level and to try and keep our heart and the rest of our body healthy. Does that make sense? Yeah? Or singing from the same hymn sheet, hopefully. So if we just have a little talk about what's going to happen inside the body and specifically to the heart when we do this type of exercise. So the first thing that you might notice happen is that the heart will start to beat faster. So in order to do some exercise, the heart has to start getting going a bit faster so that it can get more blood to the muscles that are going to be doing all the exercise. So you may well become aware of your heartbeat during exercise, and you may well become aware that it's going quite fast. And if you've just been diagnosed with a heart problem, that can be quite scary. And you might think, oh, that's a bit scary, I need to slow down, I need to stop what I'm doing. But actually, we need that to happen, we expect that to happen, and that's all part of what needs to happen in order for you to exercise. So it's something that you don't need to worry about. The second thing that needs to happen is that the heart muscle itself needs to start to squeeze a bit stronger. So when we're all just sitting still and not moving an awful lot, the heart muscle doesn't need to squeeze very hard because it's not doing a lot of work. But if I got you to all sort of stand up and jog on the spot there, your heart muscle then would need to squeeze a bit harder and need to put a bit more oomph in, if you like, yes? So it needs to push and squeeze a bit harder to get this blood around the body and to get it around a bit faster. And for some of you, you may have been told that your heart muscle has either been damaged or is a little bit weaker than it should be. So I don't know if the doctors have told you that. Sometimes they might use a term called heart failure, which is the sort of NHS speak for your heart muscle is failing to pump as strongly as it should. It doesn't mean your heart's going to fail, it just means that the heart is failing to pump as effectively as it should. And so for people in that category who know their heart muscle is a little bit weaker than it should be, we need to allow a little bit of extra time for the heart to do that. And it might take you a little bit longer to build your exercise up than somebody who doesn't have that problem with their heart muscle. So that's one of the many reasons why you shouldn't compare what you're doing with the man next door or the lady up the road who had a heart attack at the same time as you or whatever. Because we're all different, we all have different exercise sort of tolerances to start with, and also they may have different problems with their heart muscle, which means that they can get going faster or stronger, slower than you. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't exercise, but it's maybe a reason why it might take you a little bit longer to reach that same point that somebody else who doesn't have heart failure does. Does that make sense? Do ask questions and chip in if you need to ask or get me to clarify. And the next thing that happens is that you'll notice the blood vessels will widen. And you can't see them doing that, but what you will notice is that you might go a little bit pink in the cheeks, or some people go very red in the cheeks. And what that is the body trying to open up the blood vessels so that we can get more blood to the muscles that need it, but also so that we can bring some of the blood to the surface, a bit closer to the surface, so that you can lose heat. Because when you start to exercise and everything's working harder, it tends to produce a bit of heat as well. So you will feel yourself getting a bit warmer, maybe even a bit hot, and starting to sweat a little bit. And one of your body's sort of responses to that is to bring a bit of the blood closer to the surface of the skin so that you can lose heat a bit easier. And so it would be normal to feel a bit warm, a little bit sweaty, and also if you look at yourself in the mirror, to go a little bit pink or a little bit red in the cheeks. And again, that is not anything to be worried about. That's all good signs that the body's doing what it's supposed to do when you're doing this type of exercise. And the last thing you'll probably notice is that you should start to breathe a bit deeper and a bit faster, which again can be another thing that people can be a little bit scared of if they've just been diagnosed with a heart problem, because they think, oh, I'm getting a bit out of puff here, I'm obviously overdoing it, I must stop or slow down a bit. But actually, we need to feel a little bit out of breath, because that again is another sign that we're working at that right sort of intensity level. So if you're doing it right, you should feel your heart beating faster, you should feel a bit warm and a bit pink and a bit sweaty, and you should feel a little bit out of puff. And the key to all of this is doing it regularly, which is why that word there is in bold and underlined, because the key to all of this is to do some exercise regularly. Because if you start off with something small and manageable and do that regularly, the body starts to get a bit more slick at doing all of these things and a bit more efficient at it, and certain changes start to happen in the body because you're giving it that constant stimulation that you're going to exercise on a regular basis. Whereas if you do no exercise at all and then go for it, you're more likely to feel worse afterwards.
So what do you class as regular then?
Regular, well, the government targets are 150 minutes of exercise a week. So you can decide how to divide that up. What we tend to do is to divide it into 5 lots of 30 minutes, just because that seems a bit more manageable than 150 minutes when you say that to people. So we start off with something manageable. That might just be 5 minutes, 10 minutes round the block every day. And once you can do 10 minutes, you then build up to 15, 20, 25, 30. Once you can do your 30 minutes on at least 5 days of the week, you'll be hitting that 150 minutes. And then you can decide, right, well actually it fits into my schedule a bit better to do 3 lots of 50 minutes or 2 lots of 75 minutes maybe. And as long as the total is still going to add up to 150, that doesn't really matter. But when you're starting from scratch, it's better to sort of divide it up into little portions and do a little bit every day to start to get going. And once you've hit that magic 5 lots of 30, then you can start to play with it a little bit and maybe do slightly longer sessions. All right. Okay, a couple of little safety points before we get too drawn in with what we're going to be doing. We put on here not to exercise if you feel unwell. So by unwell, I don't mean sort of a bit of cough and a sniff and a snivel, but actually feeling poorly in yourself. So if you've got the flu or a diarrhea and vomiting bug or something that is dragging you down and making you feel poorly, then your body will already be working overdrive to try and kill off the bugs or the viruses that are attacking your body. And so the last thing we really want you doing is making it work even harder by doing some exercise as well. So if you are booked into the classes with us, and you're supposed to be coming once a week for 8 weeks, but actually 1 week you feel poorly for whatever reason, it's better to ring us up and let us know you're not coming that week, and then join back in again the next week when hopefully you feel better for it. And the same goes for your exercise that you'll be doing at home. If you're having a poorly week, then don't exercise on top until you start to feel better. And then you might have to go back a step with your exercise and start off a bit gradual again to build yourself back up again. Yeah, so just using your common sense really with that. We've also put on here that you shouldn't exercise with angina. So what I mean is if you actually had some angina symptoms at that moment when you were off out for your brisk walk, we wouldn't want you to just ignore it and carry on regardless. We'd want you to do something about it. So firstly, are we all happy what I mean when I say angina? Are you all happy with what I'm talking about there? So, maybe. So that's any symptom that you might get, which is your body's way of telling you that your heart muscle's not getting enough blood. So the classic one that everyone always thinks of is chest pain. But not everybody gets chest pain. Some people wouldn't describe it as pain either. They might say it was more of a pressure or a tightness or an ache or a discomfort. So not everyone would call it pain. And it's not always in the chest area either. It could be down one arm or both arms. It can be up into the throat. it can be round into the jaw, and sometimes even between the shoulder blades at the back there. So pretty much anything from the waist upwards, really. And it will generally come on at 1 of 2 times, and there are 2 times when your heart is having to work a bit harder. So the first time it would generally come on would be with exercise. So when you start to exercise and make your heart work harder, you might then get these symptoms coming through, which is your body's way of saying that for whatever reason the blood isn't getting to the heart muscle in time and enough for it to be able to work that hard. The other time that it can happen is if you're stressed and worried and anxious. Because if you're stressed and worried, your body produces adrenaline, which is a hormone, into the system, and it circulates all around the body, and one of the things that it does is make the heart go faster. So again, it's making your heart work harder, and you need more blood to supply a heart that's working faster and harder. So if you get these symptoms coming on with either stress or exercise, that might well be an angina symptom that you're getting. And if you get it, then it's important to know what to do about it. So not just ignore it and carry on regardless with your exercise. So the first thing to do is stop what you're doing. So if you're in the middle of a brisk walk or whatever, to stop what you're doing and hopefully sit yourself down as well. So that means that your heart suddenly then doesn't need to work quite so hard. You've stopped the exercise, so hopefully your heart can then slow down, calm down, and the pain might go away all by itself. So rest is the key if it's an exercise-related angina problem. Obviously, if you've just got yourself all wound up and stressed and anxious about whatever it is, then you need to try and take yourself away from that situation, maybe go and do some deep breathing somewhere, try and calm yourself, relax yourself. But we say to only give that a maximum of 5 minutes to see if that's going to work all by itself. And if it doesn't, then you should use the GTN spray. So if you've had an angiogram which has shown that there has been a bit of fatty stuff inside the arteries around the heart, then you should have been given a little GTN spray. Has everyone who's in that category got one? Yes? Good. Okay, so this is the time when you would use that spray. So you've stopped what you're doing, you've sat yourself down, you've given it a good 5 minutes, but whatever your symptom was has not gone away. So this is the time to get the GTN spray out and squirt it under your tongue. And it goes under the tongue because it can very quickly get into the bloodstream that way and very quickly have its action, which is to widen the arteries. So it relaxes the artery walls and widens them, which should mean that more blood can get through, and then your angina symptoms should go away. But you only leave that 5 minutes to see if it's going to do its magic. And if it doesn't, you can have a second go with the spray. Yeah, so we've had 5 minutes rest, then a spray, then leave it 5 minutes, then we can have a second spray if you need to, if you've still got that symptom, and then give it another 5 minutes, so that's 15 minutes in total, yeah? And if it's not gone after 2 lots of spray, with the 15 minutes waiting, then you should ring for an ambulance. Yeah, because there's a possibility that there might be a little blood clot that's gone along and blocked one of those arteries around the heart, which is what happens when you have a heart attack. So if 2 lots of that spray hasn't got rid of the symptom, we want you to ring for an ambulance just in case it is a heart attack, in which case we need to get you to hospital quickly to sort it out as soon as we can. Everyone happy with that advice? Any questions at all? No? So now we know what angina is and we know what we would do if we got it. But hopefully we're not going to have too much of that going on. But if you did have angina, we would want you to deal with that and get rid of it, take your spray, and then once the pain had gone off, then you can proceed with carrying on with your exercise as planned. And we've also put on here a warm-up and cool-down, so that's another safety point really. Because back on the other slide that we were on just a minute ago, we talked about all these different things that happen when you exercise. Now, when we were all about 20 years old and fit and well and healthy, we would only have to think about exercise, and immediately, just like that, our body would make all of those preparations very quickly, just like that. But the older we get, and also with the lovely tablets that they put you on, which tends to interfere with the circulation a little bit more, that takes a little bit more time for all those processes to happen. So the idea of the warm-up is to kind of give the body a little bit of preparation time, a little bit of time to notice that we're going to start doing some exercise in a minute, So we need to get the heart going faster, we need to get the muscle squeezing stronger, we need to get the arteries widened and opened up, and we need to start ramping up the breathing so we can get a bit more oxygen into the system. So the purpose of the warm-up is a bit of a slow start towards exercise to allow your body a bit of time to prepare for exercise. Yeah, so 5 or 10 minutes you're looking at for the warm-up. And then once you've done that, you can then go for your half-an-hour brisk walk or whatever it is that you're doing for your exercise. And then when you finish that half an hour at a brisk pace, it's equally important that you do a bit of a cool down at the end. So all that means is to go a little bit slower for the last part of the walk, so that you again can give your body a bit of an idea that we're going to come to a stop in a bit, and we're going to undo all of those preparations that we made earlier. We're going to slow the heart rate down, we're going to let the blood vessels go back to where they were, so that when you do come to a stop, you're less likely to feel dizzy, lightheaded or peculiar. Alright? So a bit of a warm-up, bit of a cool-down, also required. And we're all going to build up gradually, but as we've mentioned before, especially if you've been told you have heart failure, or that thing where the heart muscle is not squeezing as strongly as it should do. So we're going to build up gradually. So don't suddenly go out and do 2 hours of walking when we haven't done any for the previous 3 weeks. Yeah? You wouldn't do that, would you? So this kind of is connected to that as well. There's this thing called an overactivity rest cycle. That's the posh word for it. Or in other words, don't run before you can walk. So it is tempting on a good day, you kind of wake up and the sun is shining and it's a lovely day, you feel invincible. So instead of sticking to the gradual build-up plan of 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it is you're supposed to do, you're tempted to go off out and do this huge long walk because it's a lovely sunny day and you're feeling good. And while you're doing that lovely great long walk, you feel fine, but then a bit later on that day, or maybe the following morning, you suddenly feel very washed out, very weary, and because you've overdone it a bit. Has anybody done that at all? Yes. I'm glad. There's usually at least 2 or 3 people go, yes. So then you have a bad day, or maybe even a few bad days, where you pay for the fact that you've overdone it, yes? And that's your body trying to acclimatise to the fact that you did a lot more exercise than it was expecting when it wasn't quite ready for you to do that. So as tempting as it might be to do that, try and stick to the gradual build-up plan and don't run before you can walk. Don't do too much too early. Wait until you've gradually built yourself up to that magic half hour, 5 times a week business, and then you know that you can start to push a bit further after that. Alright? And if you're still having bad days and you can't really work out why you're getting the bad days, it might just be worth thinking about the activities that you do every week as well. So if your average week is like going out for a daily walk and then also going shopping 3 times a week there, and a couple of gardening and maybe looking after the children at the weekend and work and whatever it might be that is in your daily week, or sorry, your everyday week. If you then notice that everything's happening on a Tuesday, so you've got about 6 things that happen on a Tuesday, and then Wednesday and Thursday you're always quite weary and quite tired and not able to do as much exercise as you would like to, then is it then possible to try and move around some of those activities and spread them out over the week so it's a bit more even? Does that make sense? Yeah, so that might be another thing to just bear in mind as well if you are getting the good day, bad day thing happening. Right, enough of what we're not going to be doing then. Let's talk about what we should be aiming for. So in order to get the maximum health benefit, so if we're going to set aside this 5 lots of 30 minutes to get some exercise, we want to try and make sure we get the maximum health benefit out of it, yeah, the maximum benefit. So we need to follow this FITT principle, and it does have 2 T's, and it stands for that. So the F stands for frequency, so you need to make sure that you are exercising frequently enough. So the frequency we would aim for to start with is this 5 times a week. Yeah? Then we need to look at the intensity of the exercise. So that is about how you feel while you are exercising. So at the beginning we talked about you should be a little bit out of breath, a little bit warm, a little bit sweaty. Yeah? And that is a marker of how much you're pushing yourself with the intensity of the exercise. So the posh word for that is moderate intensity. So it's not low intensity, it's not high intensity, but somewhere in the middle, moderate intensity. The time that we're saying to set aside for it is this 30 minutes. So 5 lots of 30 minutes, totaling up to this 120 minutes. 150 minutes, 150 minutes in total per week. And then the type of exercise is cardiovascular or aerobic, you might have heard it called. So all that means is fast movements of your arms and legs. So we're not talking about yoga or bodybuilding where you tend to move quite slowly, yeah, or you hold certain stretches and you keep still for long periods. Doesn't mean you can't do those, but don't count those as part of your 5 lots of 30 minutes. We want these minutes to be fast moving arm and leg movements. So things like going out for a walk or doing some cycling or going to an aerobics class or something like that, where your arms and legs are going to be moving all the time. So that's the right type of exercise that we're aiming for. Okay? So probably the hardest one to get to grips with, particularly alone at home on your own, is the intensity. So most people can cope with, right, 5 lots of 30, I can do that, and okay, I'll do some walking or cycling, that's the right type. But the intensity is probably the hardest bit for people to get the hang of, because there is a tendency to want to underdo it because you're a bit nervous, because you've just been diagnosed with some sort of heart condition, and because it can be quite scary to push yourself that hard to start with. So that's where cardiac rehab comes in, because the idea of coming to the classes is to make sure that you are pushing yourself at the right level and that you are exercising at the right sort of intensity. So in the classes we try and use a scale that's supposed to help you judge this moderate intensity. So it's called the Borg scale, after the guy that invented it. He was a German guy called Gunnar Borg. Or sometimes it's referred to as a rating of perceived exertion scale, which is all very highfalutin. So that basically means a rating of how you perceive you are exercising, how hard you feel that your body is working. So it's a scale from 6 to 20, I'll put it on the next slide in a moment, to rate how hard you're working, and it's based on the principle that as you work your heart and lungs harder, you start to feel the effects. So if you actually stop and think about how you're feeling during the exercise, you should be able to feel the effects in terms of your breathing and in terms of how warm and sweaty you feel. And it also has a relationship with heart rate, so it also means that the higher your heart rate will be going as you start to work harder too. So that's what it looks like. And this is what we use in the classes, and if you go to a gym you'll probably find they've got it sort of stuck up on the wall in the gym as well. So the idea is 6 on the scale there is no exertion at all. So if I asked you all now as you're sat, sit down there not doing anything at all, you would be 6 on the scale, no exertion at all. And the opposite end down here, 20, is supposed to be likened to being chased down the road by a lion. So if you can imagine how fast you'd be moving, that would be 20. Okay, now we're not aiming for that in the class either. So it's unsurprising that we're going to aim for somewhere bang in the middle there, which it says is somewhat hard. So somewhat hard is this moderate intensity where you can feel the effects. You can feel a bit warm, you can feel a bit sweaty, you can feel a little bit out of breath, but it's not so bad that you feel you need to stop. You're okay to carry on. Yeah, and that is 13 on the scale, somewhere in the middle there. That's not to say that if you accidentally really go for it and you start to work a little bit harder than that, nothing dreadful is going to happen to you. But that is higher intensity that we're aiming for, and it means that you're probably unlikely to be able to keep going at that pace. So rather than being able to do a half-hour period of exercise, if you push yourself a bit harder than that, you'll find you start to sort of struggle for breath and feel a bit more sort of poorly, maybe, and you have to actually reduce the intensity back down again or come to a stop because you've overdone it. So this is the difficult part, is trying to sort of work hard enough, but not too hard. And that's where the classes can sometimes come in. So what we normally do at this stage is a little demonstration for you. We're using my lovely assistant, Nikki. And I'm going to make sure you're on the video as well. By putting you there, if that's all right. Yeah. So if Nikki just sits down on the chair for me at the moment. So what we're going to do is one of the stations that's in the exercise classes. So if you haven't been to the exercise classes, we tend to design it on a circuit basis. So we have 12 different exercises, you spend 2 minutes at each circuit, and as you move around all the different exercises, you have to fiddle around with the intensity to make sure that you are working at the right level for you. Yeah? And each station also has like a little traffic light thing going on where there's an easy, a medium and a hard version. so that hopefully there is a version of it that is going to be right for you. So what I'll get Nikki to do is just work through the easy, the medium and the hard version, and then tell me what her rating on the scale is. Okay, so as we start there, it's 6, I'm guessing, because she's not done anything at all. I'm just going to get her to march on the spot slowly there for a bit of a warm-up. Yes, because obviously we would warm up before exercise, wouldn't we? And then what she's going to do is start doing the easy option at this station, which is just tapping her toe lightly on the step. So you have to bear in mind in the classes we have quite a large variety of different types of patients and a large variety of age groups as well. So for some people, just doing that might well get them warm, sweaty and out of breath. If they're not used to exercise or they're just starting off on their exercise journey, that might be enough for them. But I'm guessing for Nikki it probably isn't. So where would you put yourself on
about
that?
an 8, 7, 8.
So it's very, very light. Yeah, so she could carry on at that intensity for the exercise class, but if she wants to get the maximum health benefit out of the time she's putting aside here, we really need to ramp the exercise intensity up a bit. So the next version, which is the medium version, is to step all the way up onto the step box and back. So again, you then try that one. So you tried the red one and thought, right, well, that's a bit too easy for me. Now I'll try the amber version, which is the medium intensity one, and see how I feel doing that. And you can obviously make this harder by going a bit quicker as well. So if you found to start with that it was a bit too easy, you could just go a little bit faster. Or if you're doing this at home, you can get a box that's a bit higher as well. That's another way of making the same exercise a little bit harder. So if we ask where Nikki is now on the scale.
I'm about 11, 12.
Yeah. So it's fairly light, but I'm still not seeing out of breath or pink and sweaty. So if I get her to go a little bit faster, if she can, this is possibly going to slip because there's nothing underneath it, so just be careful there. So by going a bit faster, that's one way of increasing the intensity, but also the harder versions on our circuit will usually involve some arm activity. So if I get her to start doing the hard version, so that will usually involve waving your arms above your head. So that's another way of ramping up the exercise intensity if you're doing some exercise at home, because your legs are used to you walking around, so they don't find that too arduous. But most people do not spend a lot of time waving their arms about in the breeze. So that really does work the heart harder for most people. So let's ask her now where she is.
Yeah, I'm about 13.
Yeah. So if you can talk to them a little bit, can they see me? See if you can hear any difference in the speaking at all.
I'm a bit puffy.
A bit puffy.
A bit puffy.
So a little bit out of breath, but she can still talk to me, okay? So she's not so bad that she needs to come to an abrupt stop, okay? So if she was really naughty and she wasn't paying attention to her cardiac rehab team, she might have seen the last guy on here really going for it and fancy having to go at the same thing as him. So she might go even faster, if you can. I don't want her to fall over, because that won't look good on the video. So the more you do that, you're just playing around with the intensity, and you should do this as well in the classes or with your home exercise. So try a little bit harder, see what happens. If you start to get to the point where you're really warm and sweaty, and you're so out of breath that you can't even speak, then you know that you've gone a little bit too far, up to a sort of 14 or 15.
Certainly am.
I'll get her to stop now and put her out of her misery. Thank you very much, Nikki. So the idea of that really is just to demonstrate that nothing bad is going to happen if you end up down here, but you will start to feel the effects and you won't be able to keep that going for a good 30 minutes, which is what we're aiming for. So with the exercise, whatever you're doing, whether it's your own home exercise or in the classes with us, you need to fiddle around with the intensity, going faster and slower, bringing arm movements in or not bringing arm movements in, and see the difference it makes to how you feel. And so you can get it to that point where the intensity is just right for you, where you feel a bit warm, sweaty and out of breath. Or we often abbreviate that to pink and puffy. Right? So pink and puffy is what you're aiming for. So a little bit warm, a little bit sweaty, a little bit out of breath. Yes. It's beautifully demonstrated by Nikki. Is there any questions on that? Does that kind of make sense?
Can we get her to do it again?
No. That would be very mean. We already have to do it 6 times a week in the exercise classes, so I don't think she wants to do it even more.
Is there a reason why it starts at 6 and not 1?
There is,
Not
yes.
1 to 15.
That's to do with heart rate, if we go back to that. That's to do with heart rate. So this Gunnar Borg bloke who invented this, he was working with a bunch of 20-year-old army recruits, which obviously is exactly like all of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
But when he did this, he noticed that no exertion at all, their heart rate was about 60. Yeah, so hence the 6. And then as he started to work them harder, their heart rate went 70, 80, 90. And so when these 20-year-old army recruits were at the right moderate intensity activity, their heart rate would be about 130. But don't think that's going to relate to you, because it isn't, because unless you are a 20-year-old army recruit, it's unlikely to work, unfortunately, and that's mainly due to the fact that pretty much all of you are going to be on a beta blocker tablet called bisoprolol. And one of the things that bisoprolol does is to slow the heart rate down. So it's to stop the heart working as hard as it would do otherwise. Yeah, so it's unlikely that you will hit those sorts of heart rates. So if you are interested in heart rate-wise, what should I aim for with my heart rates, then when you come along to the classes, we get you to wear a heart rate monitor. So it might be something like this, like a little strap thing that you wear around your chest, and a watch. You'll do a walking test for us first before you come to the classes, and you wear one of these. So we can see what happens to your heart rate when you exercise. And then as we take you around the first class, we will have a heart rate monitor on and notice what's going on with your heart rate at each station. So that by the end of the first exercise class, we should have a pretty fair idea of what your heart rate should be for you when you are at the right intensity. So don't necessarily think it's going to be anywhere near what that would show. And it also won't necessarily be anything like the guy next door to you or the lady next door to you, because everyone is different. But if you're interested in heart rates and you want to buy heart rates and look at your heart rate when you're exercising, talk to us in the classes and we can give you individual idea of what you should be aiming for. All right? Okay, so we've done the demonstration. So aiming for 5 times a week at a moderate intensity, 30 minutes of exercise, and just a reminder that the 30 minutes there is not including the warm-up and the cool-down. So by the time you do the warm-up and the cool-down as well, you're looking at about 45 minutes. And some sort of aerobic or cardiovascular exercise. And if you're struggling with 30 minutes in one go without stopping, so some people have back trouble, hip trouble, knee trouble, whatever it is, that means they can't walk for 30 minutes continuously, then you can always break it down into 2 lots of 15 minutes. As long as that total is adding up to the 150 minutes, it doesn't matter how you make it up. Right, and you need to build up, first of all, gradually build up the time that you can manage. So don't worry too much about the intensity to start with, because we need to get your stamina built up. We need to get the regular changes that happen with regular exercise inside the body going. And that happens by building up your stamina with the time. So once you've hit that magic 30 minutes, that's the time to then look at the intensity and try to work a little bit harder, a little bit faster, to push up that intensity to the pink and puffy. And that's about getting your fitness levels up. But you can't do that until you've built up your stamina to be able to withhold, a good 30 minutes exercise session. All right?
If the, where I live, we've got lots of hills and stuff like that.
Hills, yeah.
I go out for, I don't know, 3/4 of an hour walk, which
Yeah.
is some fast, but there's some fairly steep hills, there's one really steep hill.
Yeah.
Does it matter if you do up your heart rate and then, well, because you're going down the other side, you're
Yeah.
not up in your heart rate?
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean,
It
if you...
doesn't matter if it varies from...
No, it will do.
Yeah.
It will do
Yeah.
anyway, naturally. And
Yeah.
what we're looking at is kind of the average to be a certain level. But there'll be times where some of the exercise will be harder and some of it will be less hard.
Yeah.
It is in the circuit, even in the classes with us. So you'll find some exercises will really get your heart rate going,
Yeah.
whereas others are less so. So we're looking at the average being somewhere around the range that we give to you. And we usually give you a range that is like got 10 beats in it. So we won't say aim for 98. We'd say aim for 95 to 105 or something like that. So it gives you a little bit of play because you're not going to be able to keep it exactly on the button anyway. It's going to vary.
No, that's all right.
All right? Yes, George?
You know, I do quite a few gym classes here, which
Yeah.
obviously puts my heart rate up.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me before. I also take bisoprolol. Does that mean that, in a sense, I can do more, or it limits, not deliberately, but it gives you the capacity to do more, and the fact that the bisoprolol keeps it down?
Well, in theory, yes, but what I wouldn't want you to do is go and push your intensity even more, because I know that you exercise at an appropriate intensity already. So you don't need to push yourself to try and get the heart rate up to what it would have been if you hadn't been on bisoprolol. That's not the idea. The idea of the bisoprolol is so that you can go and do your normal activities of daily living, and instead of your heartbeat being 70, it'll be 60. Or instead of when you're doing exercise your heart rate being 130, it might be 110. So it's saving your heart a little bit of work. Yeah? You don't still aim to get to that same heart rate you would have got to without the beta blockers, because that will be pushing into high intensity exercise, which you don't need to do. You get the maximum health benefit from moderate intensity exercise, so we don't really recommend everyone should try and push harder than that, unless they are, you know, training for a marathon or some sort of other event, and have spoke to us individually about whether that's okay to do that. All right? Okay, I think there is a little slide about heart rate here, which we've kind of covered. So you can use that ball scale as your marker for what you're trying to do with your intensity at home. You can just think about pink and puffy. So I've got to aim for pink and puffy. Or some people like to use the training heart rate. And if you do want to use the training heart rate, talk to us in the classes and we'll come up with a number that matches for you individually. Okay? I'm just mentioning here, in case you go to gyms and what have you, they will have charts on the wall of how you can calculate your training heart rate. But don't try and do that, because it won't take account of the fact that you are on tablets which slow your heart rate down. So just ignore them, because those calculations and formulas don't really work, which is why you need to speak to us individually in the classes. Okay, so if you're looking at your exercise then, are you doing it 5 times a week? Are you working at a level where you feel a bit out of breath and a bit warm? Can you carry on for at least 30 minutes in one go without stopping? And is it involving quick movements of your arms and legs? And if you can answer yes to all of those, then you're already doing what we need you to do. And then the hard bit is just carrying it on forever. Yes, so it's not about just doing a bit of exercise after your heart problem and then stopping. The idea of this is that it's a lifelong change. You're going to carry on doing this forever to try and keep your fitness up and to keep reducing your risk of a problem in the future. I've added a couple of slides in here just to remind me to mention a couple of things, because people have asked me about these things. So saunas, some gyms that you go to will have saunas and maybe jacuzzis as well, which are like warm bubbly pools, which will sound lovely. And often there'll be a huge sign next to it saying, do not use this if you have been diagnosed with cardiovascular disease or something equally as scary. The reason for that is because they are hot. That's all it is. So you will be on these tablets that the doctors have given you, and one of the things the tablets do is to lower your blood pressure a little bit. Possibly quite a bit. Which is all fine and dandy while you're walking around normally, but as soon as you then immerse yourself in a nice warm jacuzzi or go and sit in the sauna, do you remember we spoke earlier about one of the body's ways of keeping you cool when you get hot is to dilate all the arteries and open all the arteries up to try and help you lose heat. So when you're sat in the jacuzzi or the sauna even, that's what happens. All of the arteries open up nice and wide so that you can lose as much heat as possible. Which is all brilliant and fab until you then decide to stand up and move. Because if you do it quite suddenly without any warning, what tends to happen is all the blood will just follow gravity and end up round your feet. And none of it will be going to your head for a moment, and it can make you feel quite lightheaded and quite dizzy and possibly even pass out. So that's the reason for these big sort of scary signs next to jacuzzis and saunas and the like, is just because you need to be careful about heat. So this also goes for a hot bath at home, and also sunbathing on the beach. If you went somewhere nice and hot for your holiday and you're sunbathing on the beach, anywhere where you are laying in the heat or sitting in the heat for a long time, that's going to happen to your arteries. And so what you need to be doing is being aware of that, making sure that you are adequately hydrated, so drinking plenty of water, that helps to bump up the blood pressure a bit. And then also, before you stand up or get up, just wake the circulation up a little bit by moving your legs a bit. Yeah, so sort of marching on the spot even in the jacuzzi or in the sauna, just to wake the circulation up a bit, to give the body an idea that you're about to change positions, so it needs to start undoing all of those preparations when we were nice and relaxed. Yeah? And then it's less likely that you'll get that funny, dizzy, fainty feeling afterwards with your blood pressure dropping. So it's not the case that you mustn't use them, it's just you need to be aware of those subtle changes Maybe don't stay in there too long to start with to see whether it's going to happen to you, rather than half an hour in there and then you feel atrocious afterwards. And slightly different note, we've had some people ask us about swimming and whether it's okay to do swimming. And generally people think that swimming is an easier option for exercise, and that generally comes from people that have joint problems. So if you have an arthritic knee or an arthritic hip or whatever, and you go in the pool, it's easier to move around in the pool because the buoyancy of the water takes the weight off. Well, that's great, but from your heart's point of view, it's actually harder to exercise in water because of something called hydrostatic pressure. So by immersing you in a pool of water, the pressure of the water squeezing against your body, which is the hydrostatic pressure, actually makes all the blood that's in your arms and your legs, it squeezes it back to the centre. So it increases the amount of blood flow coming back to the centre, which means the heart has now got more blood coming back to it and more work to do. And that is just by immersing you in the water. That's before you've even started doing any exercise. So swimming is actually harder work for the heart than dry land exercise. Again, it doesn't mean that you can't do it, but you need to bear that in mind, and we would normally recommend that you build up your dry land exercise to this 30 minutes, 5 times a week first, and then try the swimming and start off with swimming just for a short period of time, and then get out and see how you feel later. If you're all right, you know you can do a bit longer next time. Everyone happy with that? Yes, are you all still awake? It's getting quite hot in here now, isn't it? We're on the homeward stretch now.
We'll be pink and puffy.
Oh, yeah, you might be pink and puffy. We can always open the doors if it starts to get really hot. Don't want everyone passing out before I've even finished. Okay, so I said earlier that the... Yes, sorry.
How many lengths would you suggest?
How many lengths? It depends how used to it you are. You see, if you were a strong swimmer before you ever had your heart problem, then it'll be easier for you to go back to it. If you haven't swum for donkey's years, then I would just say get in the pool and just have a little splash around, maybe do sort of 3 or 4 or 5 lengths. So be in the pool no more than about 20 minutes, half hour or so, I'd say. And it's then getting out and seeing how you feel afterwards. Because the other thing you don't really factor in is on dry land you can tell when you're getting warm and sweating. But when you're in a pool, you can't. So it's very difficult to know how to judge the intensity when you're immersed in slightly cool water, because it gives you this false idea that, oh, well, I'm not warm and sweaty, so I must be okay to keep going. So it's very easy to overdo it. So the first session, I would say, just stick to something, just having a little splash around in the pool, maybe in there for 20 minutes, half hour tops. Then get out, get changed, go home, see how you feel. If it hasn't kind of knocked the stuffing out of you and made you feel worse, then you know next time you can afford to go in for a bit longer. Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so the hardest part of the exercise is probably keeping it going. So for 8 weeks you can come to the classes once a week, and then we're expecting you to do the other 4 lots of exercise at home on your own. But then at the end of the 8 weeks we will have to throw you out, unfortunately, and discharge you so that we can make room for some other patients to come in. So at that point we will have a chat with you about options for carrying on your exercise after you leave us. So there are some instructors that work in some of the gyms and areas locally that run exercise classes that have had extra training about cardiac problems and that have been in connection with us and come and observed our classes and talked to us about how to set up their classes as well. So that's an ideal scenario. If you're able to go to one of their classes, then great. But it may be that you just live right next door to a gym and that's the most convenient thing for you, but perhaps they haven't got a cardiac trained instructor. So some of these gyms won't accept cardiac patients unless they've got a letter from their GP to say they are safe to exercise or whatever. And some GPs will charge for a letter to say that sort of thing as well, because they have to go through all of your notes and write a report to say how they think everything is safe for you to do that. So there are a few little hurdles to overcome, but if you've got a gym in mind, then talk to us about it when you're on the classes with us, because we usually know the ones that have got the centres and the ones that will take a letter from us, or the ones that will need a letter from the GP. And so if we can try and help you get over those little hurdles, we will do. There are also GP referral schemes, which has been on hold in Worthing since on the back end of last year because their instructor left. But it's supposedly going to be brought back to life very shortly here. So GP referral schemes, the idea originally was that you went to your GP and your GP would refer you on to a sort of 10-week or 12-week programme at a reduced cost. So we've still got that running with Lancing and Southwick Leisure Centre, and we have it running with Littlehampton Swimming and Sports Centre, but I need to contact them now they've opened up as something slightly different, haven't they? The Wave, it's called now, I think. And FITT in Worthing, the Splash Point, Worthing Leisure Centre, Davison's and Field Place. So they were running the schemes, these GP referral schemes, but you don't have to go and see the GP, they'll accept a letter from us to get you onto those schemes. But all of this, we will talk to you when you're in the classes and you've done about 6 weeks or so and you're coming up to that time where we would be throwing you out after number 8. We will talk to you about what's running in your area and what things would suit you to try and help you decide the best way of keeping going with your exercise. All right? We really are on the homeward stretch now. So the last couple of slides are what are the benefits. We talked earlier about if you're going to get the maximum health benefit out of this time that you're setting aside, well, what exactly are those benefits? So all of these things have been proven with research that people who exercise regularly have these benefits. Okay, so your heart will become a more effective pump, which means it can do more work with less strain, and that should then mean that you're less likely to get any angina symptoms and get out of breath when you're trying to exercise because your heart will be fitter as a result of this regular exercise. That should also translate in meaning that your daily activities, so all that other stuff that you just have to do every day, should start to become easier because your heart is able to do so much more than that because of the regular exercise you're doing. It also reduces your risk of another heart problem, so we know people that exercise regularly are much less likely to get another heart problem in the future, or if they do have another problem, it's much less severe than people who don't exercise on a regular basis. We also know exercise reduces your blood pressure and your heart rate as well, and it helps to reduce the build-up of fatty plaque. So this fat that sticks to the lining of the artery walls, we know that if you exercise regularly, you're much less likely to get that building up again in the future. We can't do an awful lot about what you've got there already, but exercise stops more from joining in the party in future years. It also helps reduce stress, anxiety and depression as well, because when you exercise you produce happy hormones called endorphins that make you feel better. So whilst it might be a struggle to actually make yourself do it in the first place, having done it, it should then help boost your mood afterwards. It also helps to improve sleep as well, because you're wearing yourself out a bit more by doing the exercise. It helps reduce body fat, so if you're burning more calories by doing more exercise, then that should hopefully follow, depending on how much you're eating, that it will go and look for any fat that's been stored in your body and start to use that as an energy source. It also helps to increase your good cholesterol, which is the HDL, the high density lipoproteins. Those are a good cholesterol that tend to go around the arteries, mopping up fat and taking it back to the liver to get rid of. So we like HDL, we want more of that, and exercise helps increase it. Meanwhile, we want less of the bad cholesterol, because the LDL or low density lipoproteins are more likely to go and hang out in arteries and stick to the walls of arteries. So we want to have less of them, and your statins help to get rid of those bad cholesterols, as does the exercise as well. It also generally increases your strength and endurance as well. So if you do have any other health problems, like a bit of arthritis in your knees or your hips or whatever, regular exercise will also increase your strength and endurance for those problems as well. Help reduce fatigue. If you have diabetes, it's been shown to slow down the progression of diabetes, and if you don't have diabetes, it helps to prevent the onset of diabetes if you exercise regularly. It also reduces blood clotting and prevents osteoporosis, which is the thinning of the bones, and that's as long as your exercise involves you being on your feet and weight bearing. Yeah, so as long as your exercise is weight bearing, that helps to prevent osteoporosis as well. So if you could take a tablet that had all of those benefits in it, or I'd take it, I don't know whether you would, but unfortunately you can't. So it's all about trying to make sure that you give yourself the adequate dose of exercise every week for the rest of your life, really. You take the tablets that they give you every day, but it's also important to make sure you're getting the right dose of exercise, so you're doing the right amount of time and the right amount of intensity to get yourself all of these benefits. And then it's keeping it going in the long run. Okay? Any questions on exercise at all?
not exactly exercise, but activity.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing a bit of gardening or whatever,
Yeah.
picking up something really heavy
Mm-hmm.
was obviously going to put strain on you. So what would you recommend with that? Avoid it, or?
It depends what you used to do before. I mean, if you've been a sort of otherwise well person and you've, laying a patio or going out and digging the garden is normal for you, then we would want you to get back to doing that again. If it's possible to gradually go back to things like that, then great. But if you're either lifting a patio or you're not lifting a patio, really. So in the classes, we tend to use some weights, and we try to build those weights up. So we do some arm exercises using weights to try and help a little bit with that. But what it will be is just trying to try it, really, and see how it goes. Ideally, you want to carry heavy objects for the sort of least amount of time, not only from your heart's perspective, but also your joints and your back and what have you. So using wheelbarrows and what have you. But if you lift something and you get a pain or an ache or something and feel, you know that it's too early. But a lot of these things is just a case of being sensible, gradually building up your activity levels, and if you feel ready and able to give it a try, give it a try. And if your body doesn't give you any signs and symptoms to say that it doesn't like it, then you know that you can do a bit more next time.
Okay.
Just common sense approach, really. There's no rules.
No.
Yeah?
Okay, thank you.
Right. The last couple of slides are about returning to sex. I can pretty much guarantee nobody ever asks me a question on those. So are there any other questions before I do those? No. And then we really are finished after that. So there's just a couple of aspects to mention about returning to sex after a heart problem. So some patients worry about the exertion of having sex and whether it's going to put too much pressure on the heart, or whether it's safe to have sex after a heart problem. And also the second part of it is, after being diagnosed with a heart condition, there are 3 things that can lead to erectile problems in men. So I'll just mention those as well. So from the first aspect, the can my heart cope with it? A bunch of researchers did some research and found out that climbing 2 flights of stairs and walking briskly on the flat for 250 metres, or 275 yards in old money, uses about the same amount of energy as intercourse, normal intercourse. So by normal intercourse, they qualify that what they mean is the usual sex you would have with your usual partner. So it doesn't cover mistresses and swingers parties and all that sort of stuff, but if you're just thinking about the normal sex you would normally have with your normal partner, then that is akin to the amount of energy involved in a couple of flights of stairs and walking on the flat. So if you can do those things, the flights of stairs and the walking on the flat, without any angina pain, without getting unduly tired, without getting short of breath, then that's the same strain on the heart in terms of your blood pressure going up and your heart rate going up as normal sexual intercourse. So you don't really need to worry about that side of it. Okay, so that's the first aspect. And then impotence, or medical term for it is erectile dysfunction, or ED for short, occurs when the penis is not getting hard enough or staying hard enough to allow a man to have full sexual intercourse. And this is basically happening because not enough blood is getting to the areas that need it. So much like the arteries around the heart can get a bit furred up, which means that not enough blood's getting to the heart muscle, the same sort of problem can happen down below, and the arteries supplying that area can also get a little bit furred up, which means that when the blood flow needs to be increased to that area, perhaps it's not working quite as it should. So narrowed arteries is one cause of erectile problems that can go with heart disease. One is also stress, anxiety and depression as well. So if having been diagnosed with a heart problem, you're worried and you're stressed and you're anxious about it, when you're stressed and anxious, one of the things your body does is to take blood away from places like your tummy and your sexual organ and tries to send it elsewhere. It's part of your fight or flight response, which is supposed to be preparing you for danger. So your body is thinking, well, this person's stressed and anxious, there must be some danger around, I'll take the blood from those areas and send it to the muscles so that we can do something about this scary thing that's happening. So meanwhile, if you're trying to have sex while you're stressed and anxious, you might well then find that things are not working when you want them to because the blood isn't being sent to the right areas. Okay, so that's the stress and anxiety version. The narrowed arteries we've mentioned briefly. So the same process that happens in the arteries around the heart can happen down below. In America, they actually use erectile dysfunction as a marker for heart disease. So if you went to your GP with erectile problems, they would send you for an angiogram because they know that the link is so close. We're not quite there in the UK yet, unfortunately. But because those arteries down below are even smaller than the arteries that go around the heart, if they get furred up first, you might well present with problems with erectile function before you even notice that you've got a heart problem. So as yet, they don't do stents or bypasses for the nether regions. I'm sure some clever person will eventually one day. But in the meantime, the treatment for that is to use the tablets that you've probably heard of, so Viagra, Cialis, Levitra. These are all tablets designed to open up the arteries in that area so that more blood can flow through. Okay, so that's the narrowed arteries problem. And then the third thing that affects erectile dysfunction is the side effects of all the lovely drugs that we've just talked about how good they are for you at preventing problems in the future and protecting your heart. But unfortunately, some of them do have a side effect of causing erectile problems. So the way to know whether is it the narrowed arteries, is it the drugs, I'm not sure. If you had a bit of an erectile problem even before you were diagnosed with the heart problem, and it's carrying on afterwards, then that is probably more likely to due to the narrowed arteries. If you had no problem at all, then you had your heart attack or your heart problem and started on the tablets, and then you had an erectile problem, then that's more likely to be either the side effects of the drugs or due to the stress and anxiety that has come with the diagnosis about the heart problem. So that's a sort of very brief way of trying to decide. But if you have any issues with erectile problems, then you need to go and ask for help. So you can talk to us about it. There are lots of leaflets on the table about it to give you a bit more information. And sometimes if you're a bit embarrassed about bringing it up with your GP, just taking one of those leaflets, you can take that along to your GP consultation then and say, I want to talk about this. If your GP should say that they can't give you tablets because you've had a heart problem, that's another little misnomer that's going around. That is not true. It is a problem to give you Viagra or those sorts of type tablets if you're using the spray on a regular basis. But if you're not really using the spray at all, then there's no issue with the Viagra being prescribed as well. Okay, does anyone want to ask any questions? Okay, we'll be hanging around at the end anyway if you do want to. There is an erectile dysfunction clinic which is part of the urology department at the hospital, so if you're not finding you're getting anywhere with the GP or the GP doesn't seem keen to get involved in prescribing you what you need, then it might be worth asking to be referred through to the urology service for help. All right. And tablets are not the only thing they offer. There are injections and other treatments that can be used, or pumps and surgery that can also be considered depending on the cause and what you want, really. For those things, you would definitely need to go to the special clinic at the hospital. Okay, that was all I was going to say. Are there any other questions about anything at all? We have finished 10 minutes early, which is fantastic. I'm just going to tell you when the next talk is then. So 2 weeks today is the 13th of May. And that is the talk that we don't do that often. We do that 4 times a year, and it's basic life support. So what we'll be doing there is going through the difference between a heart attack and cardiac arrest, how you would help someone and resuscitate somebody. So we'll have some dummies for you to have a little go on, a little play on as well. And we also talk about defibrillators as well. This is particularly a good one to try and bring anyone you can along with you, because the more people we can teach this to, the better, really. We're not just teaching this to you because you're heart patients and we think you're all going to need resuscitating. We're just using the opportunity of a gathering of people to try and educate as many people as possible in how to do CPR. So family members, friends, if you have any clubs that you're members of, if you want to invite us to come and do a talk to your Women's Institute or your Bowls Club or whatever it may be, then do talk to us about it, because the more people we can show this to, the better, really. But that's that in 2 weeks' time. So same time, same place, 2 weeks' time will be basic life support. Okay. Thank you for listening. I'll be hanging around at the end if you do want any questions answered. Otherwise, you're free to go. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.